Need a holiday gift that will keep her sparkling all year long? Right now, Blue Nile, the original online jeweler, is offering 30% off select jewelry. With experts on hand 24/7 to provide guidance, you're sure to find the perfect piece. And now there's even more to love about shopping at BlueNile.com. For a limited time, get 36-month special financing on minimum purchases of $1,000. Restrictions apply. See BlueNile.com for details. That's BlueNile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Columbia Sportswear. It's snowing again, and that wind chill is killer. But you're not worried about that because you shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection. It's warmth perfected with tiny gold dots that reflect your body heat inside and protect you from the cold outside. No snow or chilly temps can stop you now. Go out anyway. Shop the Omni Heat Infinity Collection now at Columbia.com/infinity.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. You earn 3% daily cash back up front when you use it to buy a new iPhone 15, AirPods, or any products at Apple. And you can automatically grow your daily cash at 4.15% annual percentage yield when you open a high-yield savings account. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, member FDIC. Terms apply.
Serie Chronicles is a Media Chronicles production.
Hello and welcome to the Serie Chronicles podcast. I've just seen at the top of our running order document that after you Simon put together for us that this is episode number 26, which I cannot believe, Mina. I feel like we started this podcast like yesterday, and I'm really excited that we've made a quarter of a century and one extra. So go us. And how are you, Mina?
I'm okay. I got a little emotional this week over Inter. I don't usually, it's not like they're the team I support or anything. But I thought it was when I was watching in the Champions League and then when Alexis Sanchez got sent off, I just collapsed myself, And I sort of I had tears in my eyes, and I was at BBC because I was covering the game in parts with them. And I was really, really, really sad. And I just started getting really angry, but I felt really good about Real Madrid coming back against PSG, even though I hated the fact that it was Donnarumma's mistake. But it was nice to have Carlo Ancelotti, be the man that managed that,
Wouldn't it be so Carlo to go and win the Champions League again? I mean, just preferisco la coppa. He's always that guy, right? Like when everyone wants to sort of write him off and sort of make him be just like this sort of cuddly uncle, people forget, he is one of the most successful football managers of all time. Of all time. He's not, just good. He's really, I think I don't know if it's just me. I feel like he doesn't get the respect that he's earned in football somehow.
No, I think everyone almost looks at him as, you know what it is? I feel like going to Bayern and them saying that they're not working hard enough sort of made him look like the guy that just goes there and has fun, Yeah. And then you look at what he's managed and you think, God, that was a phenomenal Chelsea team that played under him, I mean, they won the Decima. They hadn't won it in, Real Madrid was absent in the Champions League until he came along and won the Decima. And then the next year, they played with 3 number 10s. They didn't have a defensive midfielder, and they were spectacular to watch. They went on that 26 running, a run win. And I just think to myself, what he's done with Milan, what he's done, maybe not Juventus, but he is the guy that, I guess he started accepting jobs like Everton and maybe he lost his luster, but I'm so glad that he's back to being that guy. And I really hope that people recognize what he's given to football.
Well, only love him. On this podcast, only love for Carlo and that eyebrow. Try and do it myself. I can raise my eyebrow a little bit. I can't do it like Carlo can. But we have had exciting stuff in Italy again this weekend. Mina, you said you're sad about Inter. Now, the Champions League is one thing. Going out to Liverpool, no big surprise. I think a little bit disappointing for the way it happened, with them sort of having that opportunity after Lautaro scored and then Alexis Sanchez just inexplicably giving the referee a chance to show him that second yellow card. We can disagree, and I know some people do about whether it should have been a second yellow card, but he was lucky, in my opinion, to have even not got sent off the first time. So don't give the referee an opportunity right after you've just brought your team back into the game. But then at the weekend, he saves Inter from defeat against Torino. And I don't know, Mina, that, he saved them from defeat, but is this enough to think Inter are still, they're not the front runners literally anymore. They're behind Milan and can no longer overtake the game in hand. But are they still Scudetto realistically a favourite? How do you view them in the title race after yet another set of drop points?
Yeah, dismal performance. And frankly, they shouldn't have even got a point because, let's be honest with you, I think the biggest talking point was that Torino were denied a clear penalty.
Oh my God, so clear.
So clear, right? Like, as in, when you look at Ranocchia and his foot on Belotti, and the referee said, well, he got part of the ball. He wasn't even recalled by VAR to watch the whole sequence of events again. That for me is shocking when you consider what Torino have had to deal with on a refereeing level against Sassuolo, against Bologna last week. Honestly, Milan, and then you think of Spezia and stuff, but this is really shocking what's happening. And I cannot believe, imagine they had gone 2-0 up. There might have been a complete emotional collapse from Inter. As it is, they managed to fight it out till the end to at least get a point. But it is very hard to take if you're Ivan Juric, and I am very devastated for Torino, mostly because this is the first time they had a record number of attendance. Everyone was there to see the former champions of Italy battle it out against this team they're excited about, a team that has seen shocking coaches before in Walter Mazzari and Marco Giampaolo, where they totally lost hope in anything ever being, exciting again, where they know this could be Belotti's last season. And this was such a great game to go to see, the best in Italy and Inter against their team that is growing so much with Belotti back in there, and to go 1-0 up and possibly 2-0 up, but have that snatched away from you is, I don't know, that really bothered me, especially because you fancy your chances against Handanovic these days. But Inter, I have no idea. I was very, very angry. And there was a part of me that it reminded me of a lot of things that I hated what Inzaghi did. And I can't coincide how I feel about him right now. In my head, 13 points in 9 games in the second half of the campaign. When you compare that Juve have managed 22, when you compare the fact that they managed 18 points in 6 games in the first half of the campaign, there is a collapse. And you know that from a mentality level, this would not be acceptable under Antonio Conte, And I keep thinking about this, and there's a part of me that I hate the fact that Inzaghi saw Alexis Sanchez get sent off. And in my head, I'm thinking, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Sassuolo had Raspadori sent off. They still played their game. You can still do something. You can still try. But your substitutions for me were so acceptant of the fact that, you know what, we're going to just try to stay into this. It's almost like do you know how you always talk about Walter Mazzari about defending the lead? Defending a 1-0 loss. I felt like that's what he did. And I feel like this has had a detrimental effect on the mentality going forward, It's much harder, obviously, to try to score a goal with 10 men than it is to defend a lead. But in my head, I just thought, I'm so upset at the way that you've decided to navigate this. I'm so upset with your substitutions. But then there's also a big part of me that wants to defend him. And I'll explain why later.
It's so funny you talk about the mentality and whether this would be acceptable at Juventus. Now I was thinking to myself, God, the loss felt so unacceptable to Torino. I don't know if you saw, not even when the goal goes in, at the start of the attack that leads to Sanchez's goal, when Torino lose possession, Juric is right in the middle of the camera screen and he just hurls the bottle. It was such a really sort of moment of pathos, such a genuine reaction and so furious. But actually, having said that, look, Torino is not an easy place to go and win a football game. They drew with Juventus just recently as well. Having said that, they also haven't won a game. They haven't actually won a game since January. So they are on a little bit of a dry run. And this is a game that if you're trying to win the title, you have to go and win. I think the substitutions thing is going to be, if Inter don't get across the line, if they don't go and win the league this season, it's going to be, I think, the the Inzaghi legacy for this season, the thing that I think we end up sort of remembering is how often it felt like in the big moments he didn't get his substitutions right. And you go back to the Champions League game in midweek and you think, well, taking off Lautaro when he scored your brilliant goal, not sitting on Dzeko still. So you've now got no Sanchez, no Dzeko, no Lautaro on the pitch, not using all the options we talked about beforehand, whether you could double up with Perisic and Gersons. Then giving a press conference afterwards where he said about Dzeko, and he said, well, we've got a big game against Torino coming up at the weekend. And that
don't even remind me of that. When he said Torino, I thought I was going to lose my mind. I really was like, you loser, you honestly loser. Anyway, go on.
I knew that was going to be something that you heard as well. I knew, but it's frustrating, right? It is because you're winning at Anfield and it's a great result and a great performance, but you had a chance to do something better. And it's not your fault that Sanchez gets sent off. Part of me thought, should you take Sanchez off sooner? He's on a yellow card, but Sanchez sets up the goal. So actually, look, there's so little time between those two things happening. I can't blame you for Sanchez still being on the pitch. But his substitutions have frustrated me all season. I don't think that's everything that happened against Torino. I mean, I think the biggest, sort of the single biggest takeaway with this Torino game is something that I've thought for a long time about Inter, actually, which is take Marcelo Brozovic out of that midfield and it looks very, very different. And that was also part of the problem against Liverpool at the end, is that Brozovic was injured and so he went off. And yeah, Matías Vecino is not Brozovic. There is no one else in the squad who is Brozovic and can do the regista role like he can. And I was thinking about this, Mina. I don't know what your perspective is on this, but do you think maybe that, like, given the conversations we've had about Juventus as well in the last sort of season a bit, and about their lack of control in midfield since Pjanic left, I know you felt even when Pjanic was there, but do you think like that's maybe become, it's not for every team, some teams play effectively without one, but I think that's become one of like the big narratives for me in modern football, is how rare it is to have a really capable regista who can do that, who can run the game for the middle, and how few of those I even think there are in the world who are that good.
You know what? It's interesting because, I mean, obviously we talk about Torino and about the fact that they went and got Samuele Ricci because he is that perfect player to play in front of your defense and control your midfield. And I've been so excited about trying to see this guy incorporated into Ivan Juric's tactics. And I couldn't believe that Empoli allowed for him to leave at the time. I'm sure we're going to do a deep dive on Empoli this week, so we can discuss more about that later. But it is absolutely essential. I mean, it's no Brozovic, no party, right? He is the man that without him, they lost against Sassuolo. In this game, they dropped points and probably should have lost the match entirely. And yes, it is him going off that scared me the most against Liverpool. It is also the fact that despite the fact that he is the guy that controls everything, he has run the most in terms of kilometers and covered the most ground in Serie A this season. I think there's only two players ahead of him who haven't played necessarily the same amount of minutes. One of them I know is Torsby for Sampdoria. But he is the guy who's also got that clever head, who maintains his vision, who doesn't panic. For me, Brozovic is perfection. But it begs the question that if you know that you are entirely reliant on this man, let's be honest, who is the other guy that you'll probably turn to? Because it's not Vecino. So isn't it Stefano Sensi? Was it the right move to give him away? Like, I know the guy is broken.
I knew we were going there.
I know he's broken. I know he has lots of injury problems. And sometimes, we talk a lot about Inter's bench. But actually, if I look to their midfield and I'm trying to replace some of these guys, like, it's not that great. Like Gagliardini, Vecino, Arturo Vidal, who's kind of hit and miss most of the time. I don't know where I'm going to go. There isn't a guy I look there that I think I can bring on. At the end of the day, when you think of Milan, they have sort of Kessie and they have Benacer and they have Tonali. They can play only two out of three and then introduce one other, Krunic is good enough, I guess, to do something, although he's not really, let's be honest, that interesting, Brahim Diaz offers something different. But I look at that midfield and I'm not entirely sure that they actually have this bench that's really thrilling me at the moment to really replace these wonderful guys. Again, Alexis Sanchez, Angel Correa, Lautaro Martinez, Edin Dzeko, they're all pretty much like something similar. There's not such a variety of different tactics and techniques, and they are very reliant on Perisic for width. They're reliant on Brozovic to control, and I just do not understand Sensi going. I do also want to say one thing about this, though, because Ivan Juric says, I really do love him. I was a little bit upset in certain matches this season. And you do mention the fact that they've had a trouble since January. And I felt like he has become overly obsessed with perfecting his own game, Torino's game, and raising his players, that he hasn't been focused enough on the opponent, on neutralizing the strengths of the opponent, on studying the opponent. But in this match, he really did study the opponents, and he turned off every avenue of their attack. And obviously he was helped by the fact there was no Brozovic, and it's always going to be much more difficult. But I love the way how they just managed to just close everything down and allow their own strengths to succeed. And that for me, he really raised him in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, Ivan Juric does a fantastic job. We're both big admirers of him here, and the other person who does a fantastic job and has done all season is Bremer, who scored the opening goal. I think he's very possibly one of the. I don't know if I can put him as the number one defender in Serie A, but he's one of the very, very best. He's already one of my top 5 defenders in Serie A. I can go that far, and also has shown up at the other end of the pitch a few times this season, and that was a big sort of start to the game to get out in front like that. But Torino were the better team by far, I thought, for most of the game. I think, sorry, I don't want to keep bringing you back to Inter when you just tried to bring it onto Torino, but I do think the squad depth thing is really interesting, because you raised that point, and I think we've talked about from the beginning of the season, why do we think Inter can win the league? Because they've got the best depth, right? And that seems obvious it seemed obvious to me early on, them and Juventus, as far as I was concerned. But I was looking earlier, and Inter have used the joint fewest players of any team in Serie A. So in terms of just players used this season, they've used the joint fewest, which is not something that screams out to you, oh, wow, here's a team with a deep squad. And on top of that, they have the oldest average age of any team in Serie A. So when you're not rotating and you're using the same players and they happen to be older players, is this part of what happens? Is this part of the natural sort of consequence that you get tired later in the season? You aren't able to finish as you started. I don't know. It's a thought that's in my head, but I definitely.
Well, this is.
No, go.
I was going to say this is sort of a little bit why that I was so angry with Inzaghi, because again, it brought back memories for me. 2014, Cesare Prandelli in charge of the Italian national team, and it was against Uruguay, and Claudio Marchisio was sent off because they were really peddling water, and I think I felt really sorry for him at that time. And then he put on Cassano, and I'm like, you need a counterattacking, you need a fast goal, against a team that was defending deep. Cassano wasn't the right player. And I was so upset with the way that he didn't fight till the very end for that match. And I felt that's exactly what Inzaghi did, and I was so mad at him, and I've been trying to figure it out. And then there's another part of me that also really wants to stand up for him, because people keep saying, this isn't the Inter of last season. This is an Inter that has lost its mentality. And I want to say, listen, they did get a 1-0 victory against Liverpool at Anfield. The first loss that Liverpool have suffered since Leicester. We're talking about many, many games. This is a team that, on a conditioning level, has lost Antonio Pintus. If you don't know who this man is, he was in charge, co-charge of Juventus when they reached 3 Champions League finals in the 90s. He was the man who was behind Zinedine Zidane when they won 3 Champions League finals in a row only a few years ago. He was the guy under Antonio Conte that ensured that they remained physically perfect. And this is despite the fact that they were knocked out of most competitions by the end of January. So not to have that, to be playing more games, the Supercoppa, obviously, to be in the Champions League knockout against a heavy opponent like Liverpool, it's going to take away from you. And to do all of this without Achraf Hakimi, without Romelu Lukaku, a natural goal scorer that right now they don't possess, and without Christian Eriksen, who is so important. People always talk about Achraf Hakimi and Lukaku, but Eriksen was also so important for that midfield and took a lot away from that dependency on Brozovic that they have now. Çalhanoğlu is great too, but I think Eriksen was just fantastic towards the end of the season. Not having, playing every 3 days without a fitness coach that really knows how to handle it, I think there's a problem with that. And I think the market needs to offer them better alternatives. They need to stop relying on the players they have and buy a natural goal scorer.
Yeah, I think loads of interesting points there. I think that the Eriksen one's really interesting. I don't think you can blame Inter for letting Eriksen go.
No,
I
of
think
course
that was
not.
a decision based on health and being responsible, nothing else. But I think certainly when you say this team hasn't got a regista anymore, well, there's someone else who could, well, when Brozovic is injured, there's someone else who could do it. I think we've done plenty of Inter, and I don't want to get stuck on one team, but I want to ask you really quickly, Mina, so just a quick answer on this one. It's back in the news again this last few days. Romelu Lukaku willing to cut his wages, come back to Inter. Is there any part of you that believes next season we'll see Romelu Lukaku in an Inter shirt again?
No, absolutely none. And also, apparently his friend denied it, but I still think that he would like to come back to Inter. I just don't think that financially this works.
I bet he wants to, so I'm going to give it a 5% chance. 5% chance just to keep you guys.
5? Ooh, you've gone all out.
Really going all out, yeah. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Is something preventing you from achieving your goals? What interferes with your happiness? Check out our new sponsor, betterhelp.com/Serie A. This is our first specific sponsor for the Serie Chronicles podcast. And I have to say, I'm really happy that it is, because counselling is something that I really believe in. Like, I have had counselling at different times myself. I admit that I didn't come to it until my 30s, but for different things at different times, I found it to be a really beneficial thing. Just having someone outside your bubble to talk to and share those experiences with. And I think that probably now more than ever, actually, with everything that's gone on in the pandemic, there's probably quite a lot of people who've been quite stuck in their own bubble. And so I don't know how you feel about this, Mina. I think counselling can be a really good thing to do.
Yes, I think it's a place where you feel you're free of judgment. You can talk to somebody who can really, it's almost just like having a friend. I mean, BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. And you'll connect in a safe and what you will hopefully feel as a private online environment. It's convenient and you can start communicating in under 48 hours. This isn't, just a sort of a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. And if you are having any troubles, and frankly speaking, it's like you said, I mean, nowadays it is a tougher environment that we're all living in. We have so much more expected of us. We are being squeezed all the time. And some of us would just appreciate a safe haven to talk to somebody outside of that world.
Yeah, I think for me, it was a really big thing was just realizing, sometimes you have thoughts in your head that for whatever reason, you're not willing to say to people who actually know you. And when you have counseling, you can say things to those people, feeling free of the consequence of what you've been scared of saying things to people for is often or scared, can be any reason you just don't want to talk about something.
Absolutely.
They have licensed professional counselors on betterhelp.com. They specialize in all sorts of areas: depression, stress, anxiety, grief, LGBT matters, sleeping, trauma. Anything you share is going to be completely confidential. Again, these are licensed counselors, completely professional and affordable.
So I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/Serie. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Serie.
All right, Mina, I think we're going to be playing this game probably every week till the end of the season, or at least until the Derby d'Italia, when Inter and Juventus face, which is just a few weeks away now. We had another win for Juventus. They beat Sampdoria 3-1. Better yet, I suppose, from Max Allegri's point of view and Juventus' point of view, they managed to do it while giving Dusan Vlahovic a rest so he can be fresh for the Champions League. Mina, are Juventus going to win the league after all this?
Can you just imagine? I think that honestly, if they do, then I think it's a terrible advertisement for Calcio. Like no matter what happens, how good everyone gets, it's still Juve and their terrible style of play and their like lots of injuries. It is remarkable. And there's a part of me that in all of this, it is a little bit worried about the state of Italian football. And I say this because I'm watching Maurizio Sarri say, I can't play every 3 days, so Lazio need a full week to prepare for games. I'm watching Inter look terribly exhausted from all the different games that they're engaged in and competitions. I feel like there is some sort of fatigue sometimes for Milan in which they couldn't continue pressing on the accelerator against Empoli, and they had time to prepare this match. And I look at Juventus and I think they've had on average between 7 to 9 absences per match since the start of the year. And they are engaged in all the competitions. And it's frightening. Is there a way that we can play the kind of football and the kind of tempo that is, befitting of likes of Liverpool or Bayern Munich, and then, entertain people and still manage to continue conditioning and physicality and not look like we're exhausted, I look at sort of Madrid and I think, look at Modric. I mean, yes, so they do have Antonio Pintus this season, which is probably why Modric is going back to track, And I just wonder whether Allegri knows all of these problems and plays the world's dullest style of football just so they can manage to play every 3 days and maintain the points record that they've got. More than anyone since January, they've got 22 points. That's 1 point more than Napoli and Milan. So they're doing something right. I mean, there's been some rather terrible performances, but at the same time, what I love about this, and one of the reasons I'm a Juve supporter, is I don't like risk. I'm very risk averse, So being able to watch a side that I can be like, oh, it's fine. That they've got this in the bag, It's exciting under Pirlo because they played some swashbuckling football, but you never knew what the result was going to be, right? But here you're like, okay, it's going to be dull, it's going to be boring, but you can almost safeguard the fact that they'll manage it at the back, they'll suffer. They know that. And Allegri and I have criticized him this season because I've been deathly disappointed with some of his choices, his insistence on Rabiot. Sometimes I don't think he plays his best players, but I've got to say, chapeau to the fact that they know how to suffer. They're managing their moments pretty well. They do show a certain level of calmness and maturity on the ball that they weren't showing for the last 2.5 seasons, not even in the first half of the campaign. So the things that he's been drilling in them has been an investment, for the future. Like, we'll lose the first 5 matches or whatever it is, we'll disappoint you. But we will teach our players to go back to suffering, to go back to understanding that nothing matters more than the result, because this is the Juventus way. You may not enjoy it. It won't be Sarri's Milan, but it is the Juventus way. And for that, I'm a little bit like, thank you very much. And I kind of really enjoy it. And I'm also enjoying seeing the progression of Arthur, especially. I think that he has really grown, and you can really see that against Sampdoria. And just the fact that I love watching Locatelli be able to be a little bit more freer and actually engage and move forward and be the guy that creates goals. But it's also nice to see what Morata can do, what Moise Kean can do. And I do feel like there's a healthy maturity about this team that will be a good investment for the future when they do start, let's say, buying better midfielders.
I mean, did you think this was a good performance or not? Because it's a strange one for me, right? Because you said it like about just doing the bare minimum, and I slightly have this like I slightly want to rail like back against what you just said, right? Because you said, this idea that the teams can't play every 3 days. Yeah, it's frustrating when you hear Maurizio Sarri sort of bring that up. I'm not going back to these sort of conversations that were had like before I was even born in Italy, where you had this sort of notion that was pushed in even in Italian football circles that actually Italians were physically not up to the game in the same way as other countries, and that's why they had to play catenaccio. That was the whole sort of thesis that emerged around it, that like, Italians have to play this way because that's how we're genetically set up. I mean, first of all, Serie A is not entirely sort of populated by Italian players anymore. These are the same players that go to every other country. International footballers. You've got managers who've worked in different countries. There's no reason that you can't play high tempo and drill in that kind of fitness. And I think that there are some managers who do. I think that Antonio Conte did at Inter. I think that
because he wasn't in the Champions League.
Well, yeah, his team did tend to go out. Gasperini, I know this season is not the best example
Yes,
for Atalanta.
Gasperini. Yes, that's a good shout.
Falling off. But Gasperini's proven that you can do it.
Even Juve with Allegri.
Yeah, so it's a nonsense, that idea that like it's not possible. I think that it's sort of true in every country you see, or certainly in a lot of them. It's true in the Premier League. I know that much. That the teams that play on Thursdays do seem to suffer more for some reason because of the Thursday-Sunday schedule. There's data out there to support that. Now I haven't got that to hand, but I know people have looked into it. But that's one conversation. But to put that to one side, like this was a really weird game for Juventus. I mean, there was no Vlahovic, and Morata obviously took his goals really well, which is encouraging from their point of view. But they had 6 shots to Sampdoria's 16. I haven't got the expected goals to hand, but I mean, it's not sort of Juventus dominating everyone. And yet here they are, like you said, they've got more points than anyone this year, and have been unbeaten now. Is it 15 games, 16 games?
You know what I love is that they were 2-0 up and they hadn't got a shot on target.
Right?
Like he's probably just been like, this is terrific football. You know, like I bet you like he's just sitting there like admiring his masterpiece, you know? And I do think like, how do you manage this? Like, I don't know how to talk about this performance because it wasn't really a performance. It was sort of Sampdoria getting themselves into a pickle and Juve being like, great, let's just defend this now, you know? And so I can't really say like, obviously it's not fantastic. You know, Antonio Conte's football, the second half of the season for Inter was really dull as well. You know, it wasn't like exciting. A lot of it was just being compact and then just taking your chances. With one thing that you were talking about, which is true, is like, you know, in Italians genetically, and obviously it's not Serie A. My issue is that you can play every 3 days and you can do it at a high tempo, but you need to spend money. And right now, money is the difference maker because, you know, what we saw with Inter and Liverpool is Inter is supposed to have this magnificent bench for Serie A, but in comparison to what Liverpool could do with their substitutions when they were at San Siro, that was what made the difference, you know? At the end of the day, you know, they do have like a forward line that doesn't change all that much, and they do play a high tempo, but they can introduce Luis Diaz or Jota or Firmino, and there is an ability there to go and take different players and put them on, even Harvey Elliott in midfield, make a difference. So I do think there's a money issue there, but I also think the style of play has to differ, right? It is about trying to control the ball as much as possible or like allowing yourself to be mentally, I don't know which way to do it because Juventus don't control the ball, but they don't seem to get as exhausted, you know? Whereas Barcelona, one of the reasons why they managed to continue playing so much every 3 days, Champions League, winning the title, winning everything before them is because they had so much of the ball, so they didn't exhaust themselves. So it is about finding that right balance. And sometimes I think Inzaghi's football, especially because it's so fun, I don't know whether it can be a little bit physically exhausting or not, and whether that's capable of stretching out across all of them. But it is spectacular to watch when it's at its best, you know? So I don't know whether that's why Allegri is...
I do think you've hit on something important. I think what you're talking about is like totally like a justification that I think Max Allegri would put forward for Max Allegri's own tactics, which is, I can keep this up all season. I think that's totally valid. Yeah. Like, I can keep this up all season. And then in theory, when we need to go, we'll have all of that left in reserve. Now, the problem with that is that I feel like sometimes you look at this Juventus team and you're thinking, okay, now's the time to go. Like, do it now. And the worry is that will be what happens in the Champions League, like that it won't ever happen, and that they'll go out this week as they did against Porto, as they did against Lyon, to a team that you don't expect them to lose to.
Yeah.
I accept it as a justification though. Like if you want to say to me like, we can win doing this and be ready for the bigger ones, you know, if you can do it, have at it. Like, you know, I can respect that as a way of winning.
Well, I guess it's possible if you have Vlahovic, because hopefully, you know, like he said, he scores 3 goals and 2 chances. But it's not about him this week. I want to talk about Morata because I feel like he gets a lot of stick. And he's always been one of my favorite players because, and people might completely disagree with me. Probably will disagree with me. Probably like, you know, one of them said, you know, one of the conspiracy theories, and this was like a thread on Twitter, and one of them said that he's a money laundering unit for clubs to just exchange huge sums of money because he doesn't really do anything. But here's the thing, he scored at least 10 goals. I mean, this is how far that people go with him. Technically, and I do so agree with Allegri when he says this, technically on the ball decisions, he is really such a technically gifted player. And I think he always, in terms of what to do with the ball, makes the right decision. Like, how do I shoot this? The problem that I have with him is he second guesses himself. It's more of a mentality issue that I have with Morata. It's a second guessing himself. And also I don't think he really knows his role that well. He is not a guy that can lead the line the way that Lukaku can, the way that Lewandowski can. He's a guy that plays off your main guy. And I think that Allegri has figured that out, because obviously from the first time against when he had him with Tevez and they reached the Champions League final. And he's the guy that was scoring. Remember, against Real Madrid, he came up with the goods. Against Bayern, he came up with the goods. In his last 8 seasons, he has scored at least 10 goals per season. So this isn't a guy that's rubbish. I think he's gifted. But I think the problem is trying to understand what it is that he does do well and trying to put that in your team and allowing it to happen. On an emotional level as well, it's making sure he's happy. And there is a part of me that was really confused when everyone was talking about him in Barcelona, because I'm like, he's obsessed with Juventus. And I mean obsessed with Juventus. His wife is Italian. She's best friend with De Ligt's girlfriend. You know, they're so happy where they are. You know, she can see her family. She's much closer to her family. And he loves being at Juve because of his relationship. So it's kind of nice to see him being like, no, this is my team. I love this team. Like, you know, even if I leave or I have to leave because I'm too expensive, I do support this team and I will always be a Juve fan. So I'm glad that was sort of all those rumors were put to rest about him not being the one that wanted to leave Juventus. And I feel like on an emotion level, if they can keep him happy, they've got him and Vlahovic and hopefully Dybala once he overcomes his 75 muscle injuries.
You heard it here first. Alvaro Morata, in fact, a footballer and not just a tool of elaborate money laundering. Do the lawyers need to get at that? Can they even say that, Simon? Cut it out if you think it'll get us in trouble. I think it's clearly a joke, but you do what you need to do. We want to take a moment now to give a big thank you, shout out to our Serie A Chronicles Tifosi patrons who've been supporting us on the patreon.com website. So we're going to read out a few more names of our newest patrons who signed up since we last did a shout out. And I'm going to apologize before I even start, because the first one I'm looking at and thinking, oh God, I'm going to make a pig's ear of this, but apologies to anyone if we mangle your name. And do feel free, by the way, now that you're our Patreons, to message us and say, you mangled my name and this is how you should say it.
Or leave a voice note.
Or leave a voice note, exactly. That's the best way you can let us know exactly how to pronounce it correctly. But thank you to David Aivazi, I'm going to say, and Kev, that's a nice, easier one, and Jonathan Kashani, and Jeremy Bowling, and Shane Colemeyer.
I'm also going to add Andrew Harrison, Arnab Mukherjee, Luis Rodriguez, Evan Sardo, and John Dooney. Thank you so much for signing up to Patreon, and join us at serieachronicles.com/Patreon, or click the Chronicles Tifosi button on our website. Can I just say, like, just a side note, Kev, you are my god. I'm a big fan of people who just put like one name, yeah. And I'm so one of those types of people. So Kev, just like Jill, just like Madonna, we don't need a surname. We don't even need your full name. Anyway, I also want to add, if you do want to support the podcast and help us keep producing it, you can also leave us a one-time tip via Ko-fi. Just click the button on the website.
Kev.
I just love that, yeah.
Politano sulla destra, prova ad andarsene via verso il affondo, effettua una casa dentro, colpo di testa, Osimhen, rete, vantaggio della Napoli, ha segnato Osimhen sul primo palo, il cross di Politano anticipa tutti Osimhen e al 13° minuto porta in vantaggio il Napoli alla prima vera azione della partita. Osimhen.
Okay, right. Next on my little list of games to talk about today, Mina, Verona won, Napoli 2. So Napoli didn't slip up this weekend, keeping up the pressure at the top of the table. 2 goals from Victor Osimhen. The second one celebrated with grabbing a camera from a cameraman behind the goal and taking some snaps. I love that. I just love a silly celebration. I can't help it. I love Victor Osimhen. I can't help it. He's one of those footballers who I just find such a joy to watch.
Wonderful.
And this is a good win, though, away to Verona. Verona, definitely no pushovers, as we talked about, under Igor Tudor, even if perhaps on this occasion, with a pair of red cards and with Ceccherini's big mistake, one of those games where they definitely gave them a bit of a helping hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that sort of ruined the game. Here's the thing, Napoli was a great win for them. But there's two things that really I have to mention. Firstly, that Barak was playing sort of despite an injury. There was no Kevin Lasagna and there was no Lazovic. And so huge absences for Verona. And you can really tell that it affected them in the way that they usually play their game. And yet they still managed to get a goal at the end. But for me, what I don't understand is Igor Tudor coming out before this match. Actually, all the pre-match conferences were really weird for me. Why would you come out before this match and talk about Osimhen not necessarily being the best striker? Don't even mention it. Don't even talk about it. Don't even allow it to be something that he can pin on his rock in the locker room and be like, you know what, I'm going to prove you wrong. Because you know what? He proved you wrong. Osimhen is fantastic. And I don't, obviously there's going to be people who prefer Vlahovic, or what you like in a striker differs from different people. I personally am a huge fan of Osimhen. I think that he has a potential to be a world beater, and I really want to see how he grows. So I think that was very strange to do that. I also think it was very strange for Spalletti to talk about it being a fatal loss if they lose this, I mean, it's like, dude, you talked about the, infamy and Maradona and Jesus Christ, I don't know what, like in your last match, and all of this just piled on the pressure. Just stop talking about fatalistic losses. Just stop. Just follow purely, take it one step at a time, and let's see what happens, And I almost feel like this shows why he doesn't necessarily win the titles that he deserves to win, because he is a terrific coach, but there's something missing there. Other than that, I thought that this was a good Napoli performance. I like the fact that they played in a way that brought the best out of Osimhen. And it was almost like Spalletti took issue also with what Igor Tudor said. And Igor Tudor, I don't know if you've ever met him, but he has this he's very smart and he's very cheeky, and he like lives for the sarcasm. So I feel like he knows better than to sort of rile up a player like Osimhen, and show that, or say, or even suggest that he might not be the best in Serie A. But here's an interesting thing that I read today from Gazzetta dello Sport. So in the 19 games that Osimhen's played for Napoli this season, they've managed 43 points. So that's an average of 2.26 points a game. In the 10 in which he not be played because of injuries or whatever, they've only managed 1.7 points a match, which goes to show you that he's so important. But also not because he's the perfect striker. I want to explain this, because he's only got 9 goals in Serie A, but because his mentality is never ending. He's just go, go, go. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just go, go, go. And that's exactly what Napoli need. I mean, if you had, honestly, 11 Osimhens on the pitch, they'd win everything, in my opinion. Honestly, they'd win everything. Just because their pure energy and desire to get far is such a departure from what I've seen at Napoli. Napoli are all about Fabian Luiz, beauty. But sometimes I'm there, and sometimes I might be like, I don't know. I don't really feel up to this, Like, I don't know. Like, I'm making them out like they're a valley girl or whatever if you're American.
I'm just imagining Fabian Ruiz now on a chaise longue, like, oh.
With a cigarette, But he's that guy that's like, no, we've got to keep going. We've got to keep going. And so I love him.
Do you know, Mina? I think like it's too simplistic with Osimhen just to talk about his goals. And actually, like the team, there's a sort of a conceptualization, I think, sometimes of sport that's really prominent when I sort of listen to coverage of American sports. I don't hear talked about that much in English sports, which is that certain players demand like double attention, right? So like, certain players in American football, like it's the big guys in the line. Sometimes you get one player who's so dominant, you end up having to put 2 guys in it. They call it double teaming. And I think that sometimes with Osimhen, he's such a presence. He's so, and he's brilliant technically, but he's also so physically imposing and fast and on top of you. And as you said, committed. I think sometimes he takes more than one defender with him when he does things, and then that creates opportunities for everyone. Having said that, I also think not to sleep on in this game, as brilliant as Osimhen was, Anguissa back in the starting 11. The last game he started, I think, was the one away to Barcelona. Having him, we talked about it at the beginning of the season, what made this midfield so special was its combination of things. But he brings something very specific, which is he dribbles from midfield. And I think that the midfield without him was missing, I don't know, a string from the bow. Like it was missing something that made it so strong at the start of the season. So I think having him back as well, big news for Napoli and this last part of the season. They're 3 points behind Milan. They've dropped some points that they really shouldn't have recently, but they're not out of this race at all. If you look at the standings and what's left to come in this season. So big win for them, certainly this weekend. We haven't talked yet about Milan, who, of course, are top of the table, did win again against Empoli. And for the first time this season, Mina, I think you have to call them, and it is very sort of fluid and moving parts, but you have to call them the favourites right now, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, they're the only team right now in Serie A that is in control of its own destiny. So if they win the remaining, is it 10 matches that's left? Then that's it. 9. Oh, is it 9?
Yeah, we're getting there, Mina. We're getting close.
Oh, God. I feel like time's going away and I'm not achieving as much as Barella is in his life, I feel like every time I think of Barella, I get palpitations, Anyway, but I do. All right. This was, what I love about this is that it's the second clean sheet in a row. It's amazing to see Kalulu just really growing and just how many players that they managed to have developed into superstars. When you think of how many guys that they've got on, when they bought the likes of Benacer for 16 million from Empoli and, won the African Cup of Nations Best Player Award. Now, how much is he worth? How much is Kalulu worth now? How much is, Theo Hernandez worth? This is a team that has really inflated, they have managed to take players for such a great price and develop them perfectly. And I feel like they're managing their game very well. Maignan is amazing for a team that has lost Donnarumma, who obviously made that huge mistake that he made in the Champions League. I feel like people just feel like so safe in the knowledge that they do have Mike Maignan, who is very good with his feet. There's also the man who, I don't know if you saw him standing and showing his teammates where they should be.
I was about to say, not just with his feet, literally stood on halfway before a free kick, like telling people where to go. Amazing. That was a wonderful scene, I thought.
Wonderful scene. And, he's a coach, right? And there's a lot to love about this Milan side. And I think it would do very well for Italian football if they win something, because it goes to show you that their modus operandi, the way that they have grown their club, the way that they have focused on important things and nurturing talent and not necessarily spending money and believing in Stefano Pioli is something that would be nice if they won it, because it would be a lesson to everyone else, But obviously, there's also a part of me that really wants to see Inzaghi rejoice as well. And I don't know. I don't know who I want to win, and I don't know who deserves to win it either. So it's about what happens, I guess, in the remaining 9 games.
Yeah, I'm not picking sides in this race, but it's fun to watch young teams doing things, and Milan are still a young team. Of course, I feel like we've been calling them so young for so long. They're probably not as young as like they sound anymore, but they are still young. Like really, they are. Like this is Tonali's breakthrough season. Like this wasn't like even I know he signed last season, but he wasn't present last season. Leao is still not suddenly an old player. Tomori and Kalulu, who of course he scored the goal in this game. Like it's a young centre back pairing. There's so much youth all through this team. It is exciting. It is thrilling. I really like what's happened in the last few games as well, where Pioli's finally sort of getting a full midfield trio together. He's pushing Kessie up into that advanced position behind the attack. It's fun. Like it's fun that we're this deep into the season and your manager is still evolving, still trying different things, still trying to get the most out of this squad. A good win against an Empoli team who are no pushovers. I've said that a lot today, but I really think that with a lot of these teams in the middle of Serie A this season, that there are a lot of teams who are perfectly sort of capable of upsetting anyone on their day, and Empoli have this season. I do think, we'll get into this in our Patreon special on them, that you're right, Mina. Saying goodbye to Samuele Ricci in the middle of the season, madness. Like, you lose some control in that team, and that certainly has made them weaker in games like this against a Milan team who want to control the middle of the pitch and can do it so effectively. Was there anything else you want to say on that game, or should we rattle through some of the other ones you've got to say to get through this week?
Let's rattle through.
Let's
Where do you want to go
through
next?
The one that's in my head to go next to, and it's probably because I wrote about it for the Guardian this week, is Atalanta Genoa. Atalanta, of course, lose some ground this weekend, drawing 0-0 with Genoa in the race to the top four. Genoa have had this sort of ridiculous run under their new manager, Alexander Bessin, and it's very easy to poke fun at. And indeed, someone on this podcast, pointing at myself, did poke fun at them on Twitter, like the fact that you've got a new manager who's gone 7 games, 7 draws, 5 of them 0-0. It's so sort of spectacularly unspectacular. I can't think of a consistency like that. Having said that, like to look at it with a bit more sincerity than just sort of prodding in that basic way, Alexander Bessin has taken over a team who in the 9 games before he took over, I think it is, under Shevchenko, they drew 3 and lost 6. So drawing 7 is a big improvement. In that run of drawing 7, they've played against Inter, they've played against Roma, they've played against Atalanta, they've drawn with all of them. This game against Atalanta, yes, they gave up a couple of big chances. They also had a brilliant chance to win the game at the end.
Yeah.
He's done it by completely overhauling the team and relying on this sort of group of young players that were brought in January. Now, that's not him. That's the ownership, 777 Partners, who took a decision in January to clear out a lot of older players. Goran Pandev, Berami, Caicedo, got rid of all of these over 30s who've been there for a long time, Radovanovic, and bringing this group of young players from over Europe. They have got a real problem in not being able to score. But Blessin, who's this manager who was a Ralph Rangnick disciple, was worked in the youth system at RB Leipzig for like 8 years, then went to Ostend in Belgium and had like a short but successful time there. I think he's a really interesting manager, even though the results themselves are like the opposite of interesting so far. I think he's an interesting manager who is going to probably be going in the next few years, be going somewhere.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, he's known more for his attack, but right now what we're seeing is his ability to keep a clean sheet. But he has to work with, pragmatically, because his team is not one that can really produce a lot of goals. I also want to say this was the youngest lineup in Serie A. So Genoa this week had the youngest team out on the pitch. So it is impressive to manage that result against Atalanta, albeit a very injured Atalanta side.
Yeah, both teams had a lot of injuries.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, you're right, actually. Genoa do have a lot of injuries. And they've had to deal with so many absences this year. But 777 Partners, who obviously now own Genoa, have also bought Standard Liège, which is a Belgian club. And that is in addition to owning Vasco da Gama, obviously South American football, and owning a portion of Sevilla. So this is really a group that's focusing a lot on football. And I wonder how that's going to work out. Like, there's a part of me that thinks, they do sort of want to bring the American branding to this and use, build the stadium, use it for several different things, try to allow all these teams to work together. But there's a part of me that also thinks, is there enough focus on Genoa, when you do have so many different priorities? But obviously we don't know. They seem to be very focused on Genoa right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But this is, 777 Partners have an idea in their mind. They are looking to really grow and manage to produce something, not just for the Genoa Football Club, but the area in general. So I'm interested to see how that goes along as well. But there is a fear always when, like with Udinese, when they started the ownership that started to buy different teams. I'm always like, what does that do? Does that mean Udinese is not your priority anymore? And so it's important to see what happens there. But it is exciting. We should do a deep dive on Genoa one day soon.
Yeah, I think they'd be a really fun one to get into a bit. And I think you've got some really interesting insight into that, what they're doing on the business side as well. It's an interesting time in Italian football with all these ownership groups that are coming in. A lot of American investment in Serie A in the last few years. What's behind that and where it leads, I think, are really interesting topics that we can't get into too much just today, but we could do that for a future Patreon episode maybe, or something similar. Other sort of standout results this week, Salernitana missed their chance. They went ahead against Sassuolo but couldn't keep it, ended up drawing 2-2, which is a result that probably suits them not so well. Another goal for Scamacca, but also one for Hamid Traore in that game. Spezia beat Cagliari 2-0, big result for Spezia as they keep their fight up to avoid relegation. Udinese drawing 1-1 with Roma. Roma yet again finding their was a result at the very, very end. 93rd minute penalty for Lorenzo Pellegrini. They only seem to score goals in injury time these days. And Fiorentina 1-1 nil against Bologna. And I think we've mentioned all of them now. I'm not sure if there's one that I've missed. I'm sorry, I should have written these down in a better order. Mina, was there anything else there that you wanted to pick out on before we wrap things up for this week?
No, I think that's pretty much it. Great job. Obviously, Lazio play tonight against Venezia.
Yes. And for our Chronicles Patreon Tifosi, we will have a deep dive on Empoli this week that you can look forward to. We'll talk a bit more about some things we've touched on this episode with Samuele Ricci and their direction now under Andrea Azzurri.
So make sure to listen out to that deep dive on Empoli. But we'll be back on Friday with the Chronicles Q&A mailbag show. Check out our website at serieachronicles.com and click the Chronicles Tifosi button to join our Patreon community, where you'll get access to exclusive episodes and bonus content. Or to support the show with a one-time tip, you'll also find a button on the website to take you there. You can also send us a voice message, correct your name the way we might have pronounced it, or anything else via the website if you'd like your question. Oh my God, a bird just showed up. That was so scary. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
I feel like there's a jungle outside my window sometimes. Living in London. You can also send us a voice message via the website if you'd like your question played on the Q&A show, or for any general comments and feedback. Find us on Twitter at Serie Chronpod, at Nikki Bandini, and at Mina Rizuki, and subscribe to the Serie Chronicles YouTube channel for clips of the show. Thank you so much for listening in, and ciao for now.
Mina's under attack.
Yeah. Oh my God, it was so scary. What's just going on? It's a jungle outside. It's huge. Like a parrot.
Guardo glaciale di Ciro Immobile. Parte Immobile, incrocia fortissimo, porta in vantaggio la Lazio e fa 144 in Serie A con la maglia biancoceleste, con al braccio la fascia di Pino Wilson. Anche lui è sempre più leggenda della Lazio.
Impossibile da parare in questo rigore se non parti troppo presto. Il giocatore come Immobile aspetta fino all'ultimo secondo, ha deciso di calciare questa palla d'interno collo, veloce, bassa, veramente irraggiungibile.
Diventano 176 in Serie A, calciato perfettamente Ciro Immobile. Qui ancora il contatto tra il collo del piede destro di Cernigoli e il volto di Luis Felipe. Andarlo a prendere è quasi impossibile, va a esultare sotto la Nord.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
For the best TV viewing experience, witness the coziest maroons, the most vibrant and brightest moons, the eeriest and darkest tombs, and radiant and vivid hues in any type of room with the Neo QLED and OLED TVs by Samsung. We're supposed to say Samsung, but that didn't rhyme, so you're welcome. Samsung, more wow than ever.